Stories don't define you. How you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and Chief Storymaker of Elkins Consulting.
In my work with coaching clients, I guide people to improve their communication using storytelling as the foundation of our work together. What I've realized over years of coaching and podcasting is that the majority of people don't realize the impact of the stories they share on their own internal messages and on the people they're sharing them with. My work with leaders and people who aspire to be leaders follows a similar path to the interviews on my podcast, uncovering pivotal moments in their lives and learning how to share them to connect more authentically with others, to make their presentations and speaking more engaging, to reveal patterns that have kept them stuck or move them forward, and to improve their relationships at work and at home. This week's episode of the podcast is a sneak peek of the audiobook, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will, to be released in mid-November. As a special bonus for listeners, the book will include 2 songs recorded by my band, Spare Change, in my living room in Montana. Keep an eye out for announcements through LinkedIn and via my Elkins Consulting Facebook and Instagram pages, or visit my website, elkinsconsulting.com, to learn more.
It's like everyone tells a story about themselves inside their own head. Always. All the time. That story makes you what you are. We build ourselves out of that story. Patrick Rothfuss, author. Why do we tell stories? As we sat at the dinner table, our younger son finished gnawing on the chicken bone and proudly held it up to show his dad and me. "Is this a Zadie bone?" We all laughed out loud, remembering with love the way my father would get every last bit of meat off a bone. If we left even a tiny bit of gristle on a lamb shoulder blade bone, it simply wasn't a Zadie bone. When my father died, our boys were 12 and 15. The only way I can imagine to keep my father's memory alive is to tell stories about him, to remind the boys of their experiences with him, and to share some of my own memories of his impact on me. I was such a daddy's girl. I was 15 when we were running errands together and stopped by the lumberyard. I entered my name into a random drawing and won 2 tickets to see Chuck Berry and Jimmy Buffett at Mile High Stadium in Denver on Father's Day. Our boys know the story of their Zadie and their mom stopping for picnic sandwiches on the drive from Colorado Springs, putting down our blanket in the center of the 50-yard line, and rocking out to those 2 legendary musicians. My dad told me about a fraternity party he hosted where Chuck Berry played and did the duck walk across the stage, just as he was doing that move at the stadium 30 years later. We laughed as we smelled the joint being passed among the group behind us, and stopped for treats at a gas station on the way home. As I share these stories of specific moments in my life with my father, I know I'm creating images in the minds of our 2 boys. I also know they learn a little something about their grandfather and about me every time I share one. I may even be triggering memories they have of him based on the emotion I share when I tell them. They know their grandfather loved music, that he knew how to have fun as a dad on a date with his daughter, and they know there was something very special in the relationship between their mom and her dad. These are priceless observations. They offer glimpses into their own future as fathers, grandfathers, and their identity as children and grandchildren. And when I share these stories, I get the benefit of reliving those moments with my father. I get to think about how those experiences shaped who I am today and how they contribute to my current internal messages about my confidence, independence, and adventurous spirit. Stories make our lives richer. They provide a function of memory not served by numbers and images. Stories are our legacy, much more than any material item we leave behind. Long before there was a written story, our history was shared through storytellers. Those storytellers were honored and revered by their communities and their tribes because they were the connection to their ancestors, their legacies, and their identities. Those stories helped our ancestors understand what was happening around them within the context of history. Without the oral history told through stories, communities couldn't prepare for and learn for the future. Narrative scholars of various stripes seem to concur with the proposition that lived experience can be understood through the stories people tell about it. Stories are ways not merely of telling others about ourselves, but constructing our identities, of finding purpose and meaning in our lives. Footnote 1. To learn to tell stories well is to build a legacy with those who are in our lives for decades, months, and even moments. Communication isn't a one-way dynamic, and storytelling allows us to connect in all directions across all barriers. According to Carmine Gallo, author of Talk Like TED, ideas are the currency of the 21st century, and stories facilitate exchange of that currency. Stories illustrate, illuminate, and inspire. Footnote 2. But telling stories isn't just about your audience. It's not just about providing a legacy for our children and grandchildren. Telling stories helps us process our memories and create our own internal narratives around them, both good and bad. A woman with a history of abuse and neglect isn't defined by her childhood, any more than the color blue is defined by the skies of Montana. It's all about how she chooses to share her stories, with whom, and why. From Smithsonian.com. Scientists have found that to build a memory that lasts hours, days, or years, neurons must manufacture new proteins and expand the docks, as it were, to make the neurotransmitter traffic run more efficiently. Long-term memories must literally be built into the brain synapses. Footnote 3. Our memories are imperfect. Ask anyone who has sat on a jury. When my siblings and I tell the same story, we tell it in completely different ways, not only because our perspectives were so different at that time, but also because each time we tell it, our memory of it actually changes. This is why the way we tell a story has such impact on how we see ourselves. If we tell a story as a victim and don't make a specific choice about lessons we might have learned from an incident, we limit the possibilities in how we see ourselves and our roles in our successes and failures. According to Dr. Christian Jarrett in his article, The Transformational Power of How You Talk About Your Life, imagine that when you were 12 years old, your family moved to the other side of the country. In your new school, you were bullied for the first time. When you reflect upon this period of your life today, do you see this as just one of many episodes in which things were going great and then turned sour? Or do you see it as another example of a tough experience that had a happy ending? Perhaps the bullying toughened you up or led you to meet the person who became your lifelong buddy. It may not seem as if the way you tell this story, even just to yourself, would shape who you are. But it turns out that how you interpret your life and tell its story has profound effects on what kind of person you become. Footnote 4. So, how do we tell a story full of images and emotion to get the full benefit of that story on our internal messages and engage an audience when necessary? What you focus on is what you see. Ever notice how when you decide you're going to get a certain car, you suddenly see that particular car everywhere? Before I was pregnant for the first time, I was relatively unaware of pregnant women. But when I was pregnant, I saw women like me everywhere. It's not that suddenly that car is popular, or that more women around you are pregnant. It's that when you're focused on something specific, that's what you see. The same thing goes for other areas of life. What you focus on is what you'll see. That's why gratitude journals work. When we begin to look for good stuff, we see good stuff. In some cases, this is called target fixation. I was talking to my husband about target fixation, and he said, inexperienced motorcycle drivers have a tendency to focus so hard on an obstacle in front of them that they veer toward the obstacle and hit it, rather than veering away. An experienced motorcycle driver will see the obstacle and acknowledge it, but the focus will shift immediately to the potential routes of avoidance. The driver will focus on the area around the obstacle to find the alternate path. As I jogged down the mountain behind our house a few days after that conversation, I realized that I was running like an experienced motorcycle driver. I was looking for the next step I could take, noting the rocks and sticks and other trip hazards, but not focusing on them. I was focused on where I could put my foot, not where I couldn't. We can use that target fixation when we share a story. We can focus on the lessons of the story, the observations in it, instead of giving a specific positive or negative value to those observations. Observe the obstacles, see them, but focus on the end result. When you are looking for the lesson in the story and the value you can take from it, you will find it. When you're looking for an excuse for a certain behavior, constraints in a situation, or the negative aspects of an experience, you'll find it. In the stories you tell yourself and others, start to look for the lessons you can learn and patterns you can identify. Consider the perspective you have when you share a story. Are you a learner, an observer, or a victim? There are many elements to a good story, always beginning with knowing your audience and ending with keeping an emotional connection with them. Remember this: your stories don't have to be epic. They have to be meaningful. In other words, the majority of the stories you share won't include celebrities, travel to faraway lands, or mortal danger. The majority of the stories you share, with the intention to connect with an audience, will be about those small moments in life that, when you look back, you realize were pivotal moments that shaped who you are today. In this book, you'll read stories based on different situations I've encountered in my life that are intended to trigger memories for you that feel somehow similar. Included in this book is a worksheet that you will work through at the end of each chapter, beginning by identifying pivotal eras in your life, and then adding those specific triggered stories within those eras, ultimately creating a story portfolio. Elements of effective storytelling can be found in each story, and each story will end with questions to help you identify specific elements, absorb them, and practice them. When you finish the book, you will have a collection of your own stories to see where some of your internal messages come from, better understand any patterns that contribute to your current obstacles in life, and practice sharing those stories to use in different situations. Footnote 1. Berger, 2005. Footnote 2. Gallo, 2014. Footnote 3. Miller, How Our Brains Make Memories, 2010. Footnote 4. http://forward/story/the-way-you-life-way-life-your-life-personality.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. The book of the same title is now available, and the audiobook version will be released in November 2020. If you're ready to uncover your stories and learn to uncover the stories of the people around you to create stronger connections and healthier communities, visit elkinsconsulting.com. And while you're visiting the website, you can learn more about the book and the work we do to improve communication among teams and through our one-to-one coaching. Thank you.
Now listen to me, honey, while